Linda Torres checked her reflection one more time in the bathroom mirror of the Riverside Community Center. She smoothed down her navy blue dress, the nicest one she owned, bought 3 years ago from the discount rack at Target. Tonight was Sophia's school fundraising gala, and Linda wanted to look presentable, even though she knew she'd stick out like a sore thumb. The Whitmore Academy was the kind of private school Linda never imagined her daughter would attend. When Sophia earned a partial scholarship based on her grades, Linda took on extra shifts at the grocery store to cover the remaining costs. It was worth every penny to see her 15-year-old daughter thrive in an environment Linda herself had only dreamed of. "You look beautiful, Mom," Sophia said, appearing beside her in the mirror. Even at 15, Sophia had more grace than Linda felt she'd ever possessed. Her daughter's hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and she wore a simple black dress that somehow looked expensive despite coming from the same discount store. "Thank you, sweetheart. Are you sure I should be here? I could just drop you off and pick you up later," Linda offered, feeling her usual wave of insecurity wash over her. Sophia took her mother's hand. "Mom, stop it. You belong here just as much as anyone else. You work harder than any of these parents to send me to this school." Linda squeezed her daughter's hand and tried to believe her words. They walked into the main hall together, where the transformation was stunning. The community center had been decorated with white linens, fresh flowers, and soft lighting that made everything glow. Round tables filled the space, each adorned with centerpieces that probably cost more than Linda made in a week. Parents mingled in small groups, the women wearing designer dresses and jewelry that caught the light, the men in perfectly tailored suits. Linda recognized some faces from school pickup: doctors, lawyers, business owners. She guided Sophia toward a table near the back, hoping to blend in. "Mrs. Torres," called out Mrs. Henderson, Sophia's English teacher, approaching with a warm smile. "I'm so glad you could make it tonight. Sophia is such a treasure in my class." "Thank you," Linda replied, grateful for the kind words. "She loves your class. She's always telling me about the books you're reading." As they chatted, Linda noticed a buzz of excitement spreading through the room. People were taking their seats, and someone was adjusting the microphone on the small stage at the front. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the school principal, "please welcome our special guest for tonight, world-renowned pianist Alexander Petrov." The applause was enthusiastic as a tall man in an expensive black suit walked onto the stage. Alexander Petrov looked exactly like what Linda imagined a famous musician should look like. Perfectly styled dark hair with just a touch of gray at the temples, an air of confidence that commanded attention, and a smile that seemed to say he was used to being the most important person in any room. "Good evening. Distinguished guests," he began, his accent adding an exotic flair to his words. "I am honored to perform for such an exclusive gathering tonight." Linda noticed how his eyes scanned the crowd, seeming to catalog and judge each person he saw. When his gaze briefly passed over her table in the back, she felt herself shrink down in her chair. The lights dimmed, and Alexander took his place at the grand piano that had been brought in specially for the event. The moment his fingers touched the keys, the room was transformed. The music that flowed from the piano was unlike anything Linda had ever heard in person. Each note was crystal clear, powerful, and emotionally charged. He played Chopin's Ballade No. 1, a piece Linda recognized from her own past, a past she rarely let herself think about anymore. As the complex melodies filled the air, Linda found herself transported back to a time when music was her whole world. When her own fingers knew their way around piano keys just as confidently, she forced herself back to the present, focusing on the impressed murmurs around her. The other parents were clearly in awe, some recording with their phones, others simply sitting with their mouths slightly open in wonder. When the final notes faded away, the applause was thunderous. Alexander stood and bowed deeply, his smile wider now, feeding off the adoration of his audience. Thank you," he said, raising his hands to quiet the crowd. "Music, as you can see, is not for everyone. It requires, how do you say, breeding, education, natural superiority." He chuckled at his own words, and some in the audience laughed along. Linda felt Sophia tense beside her. They both recognized the subtle arrogance in his tone, the way he seemed to divide the room into those worthy of appreciation and those who were merely spectators. "Perhaps," Alexander continued, now walking among the tables, "some of you have musical inclinations of your own." His tone was playful, but there was an edge to it, like a cat toying with a mouse. He paused at tables of well-dressed parents making charming conversation, clearly enjoying being the center of attention. Linda hoped he would stay near the front of the room, far from their humble table in the back. But luck was not on her side tonight. Alexander's path through the room eventually brought him to their section. His eyes swept over the parents at nearby tables, a doctor and his wife, a successful real estate agent, a tech company executive, before landing on Linda. She saw his expression change slightly, his performer's smile becoming something more calculating as he took in her simple dress, her hands that showed the wear of honest work, her face that hadn't had the benefit of expensive skincare treatments. "And what about you, my dear?" he said, his voice loud enough that conversations at nearby tables stopped. "Do you play any instruments?" Linda felt her cheeks burn as attention focused on her. "Oh no, I'm just here to support my daughter," she said quietly, hoping he would move on. But Alexander seemed intrigued by her discomfort. "Come now, don't be modest. I can always tell when someone has music in their soul." His tone was mocking now, and Linda realized with growing horror that she had become his entertainment for the evening. Sophia grabbed her mother's arm protectively, but Alexander pressed on. "These hands," he said, gesturing toward Linda's weathered fingers, "they look like they've done honest work. Very admirable. But surely they could manage a simple tune on the piano." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Linda could feel the eyes of everyone in their section of the room watching her, some with curiosity, others with the uncomfortable fascination people have when witnessing someone else's embarrassment. "I really couldn't," Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's smile grew wider, more predatory. "Oh, but I insist. What harm could it do? Just a simple song, maybe Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star?" The suggestion drew chuckles from some nearby tables, and Linda felt her face burn with shame. The moment stretched on, and Linda realized she was at a crossroads. She could make an excuse and try to disappear, confirming everything Alexander seemed to think about her, or she could stand up and face whatever was about to happen. Looking at Sophia's mortified face, Linda made her choice. Linda's heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The silence stretched on as all eyes remained fixed on her. She could see the mixture of expressions around her. Some people looked uncomfortable with Alexander's obvious cruelty, while others seemed curious to see how this would play out. Sophia squeezed her mother's arm tighter. "Mom, you don't have to do this," she whispered urgently. "Let's just leave." But something in Linda's chest was stirring, a feeling she hadn't experienced in over 20 years. It wasn't just anger at Alexander's condescending behavior, though that was certainly part of it. It was something deeper, something that had been buried under years of grocery store shifts, bill payments, and putting everyone else's needs before her own. "Actually," Linda heard herself saying, her voice stronger than she felt, "I think I will." The words surprised even her. Sophia's eyes went wide and Alexander's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. He clearly hadn't expected her to accept his challenge. "Wonderful," Alexander exclaimed, clapping his hands together. "How delightfully brave of you." His tone dripped with false encouragement, like an adult praising a child for attempting something far beyond their abilities. Linda stood up slowly, her legs feeling unsteady. The simple act of rising from her chair seemed to take forever, and she was aware of every person watching her movement. Some people had their phones out, probably expecting to record something amusing to share later. "Mom, please?" Sophia whispered one more time, but Linda looked down at her daughter and saw something that surprised her. Behind the embarrassment and worry in Sophia's eyes, there was also a spark of curiosity. Sophia had never known her mother to be anything other than careful, practical, and reserved. This moment of defiance was completely out of character. "It's okay, sweetheart," Linda said softly. "Sometimes we have to face our fears." As Linda made her way toward the piano, Alexander continued his commentary. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a brave volunteer. Let's give her some encouragement." He started clapping, and the audience joined in with polite but awkward applause. The walk to the front of the room felt like the longest journey of Linda's life. With each step, she became more aware of her appearance. Her discount store dress, her practical shoes, her hands that bore the calluses of years spent scanning ng barcodes and lifting boxes. She felt like an imposter approaching something sacred. When she reached the piano bench, Alexander made a grand gesture of stepping aside. "The stage is yours, my dear. Don't be nervous, we're all very understanding here." He winked at the audience, clearly setting up what he expected to be an entertaining disaster. Linda looked down at the piano keys, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The black and white keys stared back at her like old friends she hadn't seen in decades. Her fingers tingled with muscle memory she thought had been lost forever. "Take your time," Alexander said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent room. "Perhaps start with something simple. Mary had a little lamb? Happy birthday?" His suggestions drew a few nervous chuckles from the audience. Linda sat down on the bench and adjusted her position. The piano bench felt both foreign and familiar at the same time. She placed her hands gently on the keys, not pressing down yet, just feeling the smooth surface beneath her fingertips. Behind her, she could hear whispered conversations starting up. Someone said, "This is painful to watch." Another voice murmured, "Why is she putting herself through this?" She heard Alexander moving around, probably positioning himself to get the best view of her inevitable failure. But as Linda sat there, something unexpected happened. The noise of the room began to fade away. The whispers, the soft clinking of glasses, even Alexander's presence behind her. It all became background. Her focus narrowed to just her hands and the keys beneath them. She thought about Sophia, sitting in the back of the room, probably dying of embarrassment, but also watching her mother do something completely unprecedented. She thought about all the years of early morning grocery store shifts, of counting every penny, of making sacrifices so her daughter could have opportunities she herself had given up. "Whenever you're ready," Alexander prompted, his voice cutting through her thoughts. "We don't have all night." Linda closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, her vision was clear and her hands were steady. She had made her decision, not just to play, but to play something that would remind her who she used to be, who she still was underneath all the years of just surviving. The audience was getting restless. She could hear chairs creaking as people shifted in their seats, probably wondering if she was going to sit there all night without playing a single note. Alexander cleared his throat impatiently. "Perhaps you need some help choosing a song," he offered, his tone now carrying a hint of annoyance that his entertainment was taking so long to begin. Linda looked over her shoulder at him. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, she met his eyes directly. What he saw there made his confident smile falter slightly. There was something in her gaze that he hadn't noticed before. A depth, a strength, maybe even a hint of amusement. "No help needed," Linda said quietly, but her voice carried clearly in the silent room. "I know exactly what I want to play." She turned back to the piano and positioned her hands over the keys. Behind her, she could sense Alexander's growing impatience and the audience's mixture of curiosity and second-hand embarrassment. Someone's phone camera was probably still recording, ready to capture what everyone expected to be a cringe-worthy moment. Linda thought one more time about Sophia, about the years of sacrifice, about the dreams she had buried so deep she sometimes forgot they had ever existed. Then she thought about the young woman she used to be, the one who had once believed music could change the world. The room was completely silent now, waiting. Alexander had stopped moving around and was standing perfectly still behind her. Even the waitstaff had paused in their work to watch. Linda took one final breath and allowed her fingers to find their first position on the keys. The muscle memory was still there, buried but not lost. Her hands knew what to do even after all these years. What happened next would change everything for everyone in that room, but especially for Linda herself. As she prepared to press down on the keys for the first time in over 20 years, she felt a familiar surge of emotion that she had almost forgotten existed. The pure, undiluted joy of being about to make music. The first note was about to sound, and nothing would ever be the same again. Linda's fingers touched the keys, and the first note rang out clear and pure. But it wasn't Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star or any simple melody that Alexander had mockingly suggested. Instead, the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the air with such breathtaking clarity that several people in the audience gasped audibly. The transformation was immediate and startling. The woman who had seemed so out of place just moments before was now completely in her element. Her posture straightened, Her movements became fluid and confident, and her face took on an expression of deep concentration mixed with pure joy. Alexander's smug smile vanished instantly. He took a step closer to the piano, his eyes widening as he recognized not just the piece she was playing, but the incredible skill with which she was playing it. This wasn't just someone who knew how to play piano. This was the work of a true master. The audience fell into complete silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Gone was the uncomfortable anticipation of witnessing someone's humiliation. Instead, the room was filled with the kind of respectful quiet that only occurs when people realize they are witnessing something extraordinary. Linda's fingers moved across the keys with impossible grace and precision. Each note was perfectly placed, every phrase shaped with the kind of musical intelligence that can't be taught or faked. The complex passages that would challenge even accomplished pianists flowed from her hands as naturally as breathing. Mrs. Henderson, Sophia's English teacher, put her hand over her heart and whispered to her companion, "My God, she's incredible." At the back of the room, Sophia sat frozen in her chair, her mouth slightly open in shock. She had never heard her mother play a single note of music. There had been no piano in their small apartment, no mention of musical training, nothing to suggest that her mother possessed this kind of extraordinary talent. The music continued to pour from the piano, each passage more beautiful than the last. Linda's eyes were closed now, and tears had begun to stream down her cheeks. But these weren't tears of embarrassment or fear. They were tears of recognition, of coming home to a part of herself she had buried so deep she had almost forgotten it existed. Alexander stood motionless behind her, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching awe. As a professional musician himself, he could recognize the level of skill he was witnessing. This wasn't just someone who had taken piano lessons as a child. This was conservatory-level playing, the kind of technique and musicality that took decades to develop. The emotional depth of Linda's interpretation was what truly set her apart. She wasn't just playing the notes correctly, she was telling a story, pouring her heart into every phrase. The pain of sacrifice, the weight of responsibility, the dreams deferred but never forgotten, all of it was there in her music. Dr. Patterson, a successful surgeon who was seated near the front, leaned over to his wife and whispered, "I've heard this piece performed at Carnegie Hall, and it wasn't this moving." As Linda moved into the second movement, the tender, lyrical section that requires not just technical skill, but deep emotional understanding, people throughout the room began to openly weep. There was something in her playing that spoke to universal human experiences. Love, loss, hope, and resilience. One of the waitstaff, a young man who had been clearing tables in the back, stopped what he was doing and stood perfectly still, completely captivated by what he was hearing. The kitchen staff had even come out to listen, standing quietly in the doorway with expressions of wonder on their faces. Alexander felt his worldview shifting beneath his feet. He had built his reputation on being one of the finest pianists of his generation, but he was forced to admit that what he was hearing surpassed even his own abilities. More than that, it had a quality that his playing often lacked. It had soul. The technical passages that followed would have challenged any professional pianist, but Linda navigated them with ease. Her years away from the piano seemed to melt away as if they had never happened. Her muscle memory was perfect, her timing flawless, her interpretation deeply personal yet universally moving. Sophia finally found her voice and whispered to the person sitting next to her, "That's my mom." The words came out with a mixture of pride and disbelief that made the stranger smile through her own tears. As the piece built toward its climax, Linda's playing became even more powerful. Her whole body was involved now, her shoulders and arms moving with the music, her face showing the intense concentration required for such a demanding piece. Yet she made it look effortless, as if the music was simply flowing through her rather than being consciously created. The room was completely silent except for the piano. No one dared move or speak, afraid of breaking the spell that had been cast over them all. Even the children who had been fidgeting earlier in the evening sat perfectly still, somehow understanding that they were witnessing something special. Alexander found himself thinking about his own playing, about the mechanical perfection he had always prided himself on. Watching Linda, he realized that technical skill without emotional truth was just showing off. She was reminding everyone in the room why music mattered, why it had the power to transform both performer and audience. The woman who had seemed so ordinary, so easily dismissed, was revealing herself to be anything but ordinary. Her playing spoke of years of training, of natural talent that had been carefully cultivated, of a deep understanding of music that went far beyond simple entertainment. Mrs. Chen, whose husband owned a successful business and who had initially looked down on Linda's simple appearance, found herself completely humbled. She realized that she had made assumptions based on clothing and social status that were not just wrong but shamefully narrow-minded. As Linda played, her own internal transformation was just as dramatic as the effect she was having on her audience. For the first time in over 20 years, she felt completely herself. The worried single mother, the tired grocery store worker, the woman who constantly doubted her place in the world, all of that fell away, replaced by the musician she had always been at her core. The music was telling her story too, the early promise, the tragic interruption, the years of silence, and now this unexpected return. Every note carried the weight of her experiences, the sacrifices she had made, the dreams she had set aside. When she reached the final movement, the triumphant conclusion that brings all the themes together in a glorious celebration, Linda's playing reached heights that left even Alexander speechless. The power and beauty of her performance had transformed not just the evening, but everyone who was fortunate enough to witness it. As the final notes approached, the entire room seemed to hold its breath, not wanting this magical moment to end. Linda's fingers found the last chords with perfect precision, and when the final note faded into silence, the spell was complete. For several seconds, no one moved. The silence was profound and respectful, the kind that follows only the most extraordinary performances. Then slowly someone began to clap. The applause started slowly. Sophia was the first to clap, her hands coming together almost unconsciously as tears streamed down her face. Then Mrs. Henderson joined in, followed by Dr. Patterson and his wife. Within seconds, the entire room erupted in thunderous applause. But this wasn't the polite, obligatory clapping that had followed Alexander's earlier performance. This was something deeper, the kind of applause that comes from people who have been genuinely moved, who have witnessed something that touched their souls. People weren't just clapping. They were standing, many with tears in their eyes, some openly sobbing. Linda sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, seemingly unable to believe what had just happened. The transformation was remarkable. The confident, masterful musician was gradually giving way to the humble grocery store worker again, as if she couldn't quite accept that the performance had been real. Alexander stood frozen behind her, his face a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been shame. His mouth opened and closed several times as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. The man who always had something clever or cutting to say was completely speechless. The applause continued for what felt like forever. People were wiping their eyes, shaking their heads in amazement, turning to their neighbors with expressions of wonder. The young waiter who had stopped to listen was clapping so hard his hands were turning red. Finally, Linda stood up from the piano bench and turned to face the room. She looked smaller somehow, as if the confidence that had carried her through the performance was already fading. She gave a small, uncertain wave to the audience, clearly overwhelmed by their response. "Who are you?" Alexander finally managed to say, his voice barely audible over the continuing applause. "I mean, who are you, really?" Linda looked at him with those same steady eyes that had surprised him earlier. "I'm exactly who I said I was. I work at Morrison's Grocery on 5th Street. I'm Sophia's mom. I'm just someone who used to play piano." "Used to?" Alexander's voice cracked slightly. "You don't just used to play like that. That level of skill, that interpretation, you're talking about decades of training, professional-level technique. Where did you study? Who was your teacher?" The audience had quieted down enough to hear their conversation, and everyone leaned in, hungry for answers. How had this ordinary-looking woman just delivered one of the most extraordinary performances any of them had ever witnessed? Linda glanced back at Sophia, who was still standing and clapping, her face glowing with pride and amazement. Taking a deep breath, Linda decided it was time to tell the truth, at least part of it. "I studied at the New England Conservatory," she said quietly. "I was accepted to Juilliard when I was 18. Full scholarship." A collective gasp went through the room. Juilliard was a name everyone recognized, even those who knew nothing about classical music. It was where the best of the best went to study. Alexander staggered back a step. Juilliard. You went to Juilliard and you're working at a grocery store. That's impossible. What happened? Linda's composure began to crack. The weight of 23 years of buried dreams, of choices made and sacrifices endured, suddenly felt crushing. I didn't go, she said, her voice getting smaller. I was supposed to start in the fall of 2002, but she stopped, unable to continue for a moment. Sophia had made her way to the front of the room and was now standing beside her mother, taking her hand in a gesture of support. My parents died in a car accident that summer, Linda continued, her voice steadier now with Sophia beside her. I had 3 younger brothers. The youngest was only 8 years old. There was no one else. No other family who could take them in. The room was completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff who had come out to listen were standing perfectly still, hanging on every word. I had to choose, Linda said, looking directly at Alexander. I could follow my dreams and let my brothers go into foster care, probably separated, or I could give up music and keep our family together. Alexander's face had gone pale. You gave up Juilliard to raise your brothers? It wasn't really a choice, Linda said simply. They were my family. They needed me. So I got a job at a diner, then later at the grocery store. I worked double shifts to keep us afloat. I made sure they all graduated high school, helped them get started in their lives. Music became something I couldn't afford to think about. Dr. Patterson's wife was crying openly now. Several other people in the audience were wiping their eyes. The story Linda was telling was more moving than her performance had been, and that was saying something. But surely you could have gone back later, Alexander pressed, though his tone had completely changed from mocking to genuinely concerned. When your brothers were older? Linda smiled sadly. By the time the youngest graduated, I was 35. I hadn't touched a piano in over 10 years. I had Sophia to think about. She was just a baby then, and her father wasn't in the picture. The music world, it moves on without you. There's always someone younger, someone who never stopped practicing. Sophia squeezed her mother's hand tighter. She was hearing details of her mother's story that Linda had never shared before. The sacrifice, the dreams abandoned, the weight of responsibility that Linda had carried alone for so many years. I convinced myself I was happy, Linda continued. I told myself that I had made the right choice, that music was just a hobby anyway. I got good at not thinking about it, at pushing down that part of myself, until tonight. Alexander ran his hands through his hair, his perfectly styled appearance becoming disheveled as the magnitude of what he had done began to sink in. I don't know what to say. I thought I was making fun of someone I assumed knew nothing about music. Instead, I was mocking someone who sacrificed everything for her family. You couldn't have known, Linda said quietly, though there was a firmness in her voice that suggested she wasn't completely absolving him. But maybe that's the point. You can't know what someone's story is just by looking at them. The room was so quiet you could hear people breathing. Alexander looked around at the faces watching. Him, faces that had gone from amused anticipation to deep respect for Linda and something approaching disgust for his earlier behavior. I have spent my entire career believing that talent and training were enough, Alexander said slowly. I thought that being technically perfect was what mattered most. But what you just played, it had something my playing has never had. It had heart. It had real life in it. Linda looked surprised by his admission. Music without life experience is just noise, she said. I may have given up performing, but I never stopped feeling. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of joy with my children, it all went into that music tonight. Maybe I needed to live through all of this to really understand what Rachmaninoff was trying to say. Sophia could no longer contain herself. Mom, you're amazing, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. I had no idea. All these years I thought you were just my mom who worked at the store. I never knew you were this incredible musician. Linda turned to her daughter with tears in her eyes. I am just your mom who works at the store. That person is real too. But tonight I remembered that I'm also other things. I'm all of these things at once. The applause started again, but softer this time, more reverent. People weren't just clapping for the performance anymore. They were applauding the woman, the mother, the human being who had shown them what real strength looked like. Alexander stood there for a long moment, looking like a man whose entire world had just been turned upside down. The arrogant performer who had walked onto that stage an hour ago was gone, replaced by someone who appeared genuinely humbled and confused about everything he thought he knew. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room, "not just for tonight, but for who I've become. I've spent so many years thinking that success and talent gave me the right to judge others. I was wrong. Completely wrong." Linda nodded slowly, accepting his words but not quite ready to forgive everything just yet. "We all make mistakes," she said. "What matters is what we do next." Dr. Patterson stepped forward from the audience. "Excuse me," he said, addressing Linda directly. "I don't mean to interrupt, but I have to ask, have you considered returning to music? What we just witnessed was extraordinary." "Oh, I couldn't," Linda said immediately, her old insecurities rushing back. "I'm 43 years old. I haven't performed in over 20 years. The music world has moved on without me." "The music world needs what you have," said Mrs. Henderson, who had also approached the front of the room. "Age doesn't matter when you have that kind of gift. There are community orchestras, teaching opportunities, so many ways to share what you have." Sophia looked up at her mother with hopeful eyes. "Mom, you should consider it. Tonight proved that the music never left you. It was just waiting." Alexander, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. "I have a proposition," he said, then caught himself. "No, that's not right. I have a request. Would you consider letting me help? I have connections in the music world, and what you have shouldn't be hidden away." Linda looked at him suspiciously. "Help how? I know it sounds strange coming from me, especially after how I behaved tonight," Alexander said, running his hand through his hair again. "But I've never heard anyone play with the depth of emotion you just showed. There are recording studios, small concert venues, places where people would appreciate what you have to offer. You don't have to give up your life or your responsibilities, but maybe you don't have to give up music entirely either." The room buzzed with quiet conversations as people began to process what they had witnessed. Many were already pulling out their phones, not to record more footage, but to call friends and family to tell them about the incredible performance they had just seen. Janet Morrison, whose family owned the grocery store where Linda worked, pushed through the crowd. Linda's heart sank, assuming she was about to be fired for the spectacle she had caused. "Linda," Janet said, slightly out of breath. "I had no idea. In all the years you've worked for us, I never knew you had this incredible talent. Mrs. Morrison, I'm sorry if this caused any embarrassment for the store," Linda began, but Janet cut her off. "Embarrassment? Are you kidding? I'm proud to employ someone with your talent. In fact, I want to talk to you about something. We've been thinking about hosting community events at the store, music nights, local artist showcases. Would you be interested in being our first featured performer?" Linda's eyes widened. The idea of performing again, even in a small venue like a grocery store, felt both terrifying and thrilling. Sophia squeezed her mother's arm. "Say yes, Mom." Over the next few minutes, more people approached Linda with opportunities. The local community college mentioned their music program needed adjunct instructors. A nearby nursing home asked if she would consider playing for their residents. Even some of the parents from Sophia's school expressed interest in piano lessons for their children. Alexander watched all of this with a mixture of amazement and something that looked like regret. Finally, he approached Linda one more time. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "I've been performing professionally for 15 years. I've played in the most prestigious concert halls in the world. But tonight, watching you play, I realized I've forgotten why I started music in the first place. You reminded me that it's not about being perfect or impressive. It's about touching people's hearts." Linda studied his face, seeing genuine emotion there for the first time since she'd met him. "Music saved me when I was young," she said. "It gave me a way to express things I couldn't say with words. Tonight it saved me again in a different way. Would you consider performing with me sometime?" Alexander asked hesitantly. "Not as a student or someone I'm helping, but as an equal? I think I could learn a lot from you." Before Linda could answer, Sophia piped up. "Mom, people are recording this conversation. You're going to be famous." Indeed, several people had been discreetly filming parts of the evening on their phones. Within hours, clips of Linda's performance would be shared on social media, and within days the video would reach hundreds of thousands of people around the world. But that fame was still to come. Right now, Linda was focused on something much simpler and more important. She looked around the room at all the faces watching her, faces that had gone from condescending or indifferent to respectful and admiring. But most importantly, she looked at Sophia, whose expression showed pure pride and joy. "You know what the best part of tonight was?" Linda said to her daughter. "It wasn't proving anything to anyone else. It was remembering who I am, all the different parts of me. I'm your mom who works at the grocery store, but I'm also a musician. I'm someone who sacrificed her dreams for family, but I'm also someone whose dreams never really died." Sophia hugged her mother tightly. "I always knew you were special, but now everyone else knows it too." As the evening wound down and people began to leave, many stopped to thank Linda personally for her performance. Alexander lingered until the end, clearly struggling with something he wanted to say. "I need you to know," he finally said, "that tonight changed me. I don't know if I can ever perform the same way again. You've shown me what I've been missing." Linda smiled at him, and for the first time all evening it was a completely genuine smile with no trace of fear or defensiveness. "Maybe that's a good thing," she said. "Maybe we both needed tonight to happen." 3 months later, Linda was still working at the grocery store, but only part-time. She had started teaching piano lessons in the evenings and had performed twice at the community center. The video of her performance had indeed gone viral, leading to opportunities she never could have imagined. More importantly, her relationship with Sophia had deepened. They spent time together at the piano Linda had been able to afford with her teaching income, with Sophia learning to play and Linda rediscovering the joy of sharing music with someone she loved. Alexander had kept his word too. He had changed his approach to performing, focusing more on emotional connection than technical perfection. He and Linda had performed together once, a duet that brought tears to everyone who heard it. But the most significant change was in Linda herself. She walked taller now, spoke with more confidence, and had stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. She had learned that it was possible to honor both her sacrifices and her dreams, to be both the practical mother and the passionate musician. That night at the community center had shown her something she had forgotten, that extraordinary people can look perfectly ordinary, and that dreams deferred are not always dreams denied. Sometimes they're just dreams waiting for the right moment to soar again.